conversations on this historic day. 37 years later, Robert Mugabe resigned from office. Nobody thought that would ever come, but he has. He had said that he would continue and he would only leave if his people had asked him to, but it seems that that day came sooner than he thought. I'm now joined from our studio in Pretoria by Dr. Martin Rupia, a retired Zimbabwean Lieutenant Colonel, and with me here in studio we have Tamuka Chirambowa, who's from the University of Johannesburg. Gentlemen, a very good evening to you. Thank you very much for joining us. So let me start with you, Mr. Chirambowa, here in Johannesburg. You're seeing the images in Harare, you're seeing some of the reactions, and people would be asking, and they might be confused. 3 weeks ago, we saw stadiums full of ZANU-PF supporters endorsing Dr. Mugabe, endorsing Robert Mugabe. How is it that we can have scenes like this now?
I think basically what you have to understand, this is not uncommon what has happened in Zimbabwe. Look at the fall of Mobutu, when he had a massive rally in Kinshasa 3 days before Kinshasa was stormed. This has happened with all dictators, but you have to understand that 3 weeks ago, by then the army had not made it explicitly clear that it had withdrawn support from President Mugabe. And remember, President Mugabe's rule, I mean, I've argued before here and others, was that it was simply hinged on the military. It was not by popular legitimacy. So it was simply because by then it had not quite come out. But the moment the military came out clear that it had gone different ways with Robert Mugabe, you even saw, I mean, last weekend on Saturday when people went in their thousands, it showed that they had shifted. So I think the military has been the decisive factor in this war, in the fall of Robert Mugabe, rather than just the people alone.
All right, let's go to Pretoria, where Dr. Martin Rupia is. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Your reactions and your thoughts. It's been a pretty dramatic week. We thought that he'd be forced out of power after he failed to resign on Sunday evening, but he resigned.
Yes, thanks, Peter, for inviting us. I feel slightly embarrassed, you know, in my former career as a military colonel. But anyway, that's another story. What we now have is we have to put on our thinking caps to provide, you know, relief and, you know, and to respond to the high expectations of our people who have been oppressed and impoverished for so long. You can see almost an analogy of what we did in 1980, celebrating independence, and then we were disappointed. We cannot afford to disappoint Zimbabweans on the, you know, for the second time. So although the succession is really a ruling party ZANU-PF process, once that is done, we are hoping in the next 2 days, then we hope the colleagues will think much broader and bring in all stakeholders to try and work on the recovery that we see young people, young talent being wasted in terms of the political elite that has just been removed from office.
What do you think happened since Sunday? Because Sunday we thought he was going to resign and he didn't, but a lot of things must have happened. He tried to call a cabinet meeting this morning and no one showed up apparently except maybe two faces. We also saw Kenneth Kaunda come in from Zambia, perhaps to have a chat with him. Do you think it was a combination of all of these factors that eventually he just lost the fight?
Certainly the man was not prepared to go. He put up a very good fight. But I think what has happened is a series of incremental positions. First, of course, his own party recalling him, followed by an impeachment process. I'm sure he did not expect all of this to go through without popular support. We also must remember the wide march on Saturday, in which all shades of political opinion and stakeholders, churches, youths and others, and we have an ongoing strike at the University of Zimbabwe. The youth are also expressing not only to get the president out, but they're also protesting against the fake, degree. So all these things have come together. And during the impeachment process, the Speaker of the House, Jacob Mudenda, then received a letter of resignation, demonstrating that what President Lungu, I think, had done in sending former President Kaunda to have a very serious discussion with Mugabe had worked. So it's a series of the combinations. But I think in this euphoria, we have to begin to put on our thinking caps. How do we take Zimbabwe forward? How do we recover? How do you provide hope?
Okay, Mr. Chiramboa, how do we start that process? Right now we're busy wondering who's going to be installed as president. Is Mpoko president at the moment, as the constitution might suggest? What happens next, and then what must happen to stabilize things?
I think basically, if you had listened to ZANU-PF Chief Whip Lovemore Matuke, he made it clear that within 24 to 48 hours they would have, Mnangagwa would be head of state. So basically, because this thing has been solved within ZANU-PF, what it actually means, ZANU-PF, when the constitution is read in accordance with the sixth schedule, to the constitution, it is supposed to forward a candidate, and if ZANU-PF, the moment they forward, their candidate to say Emmerson Mnangagwa is going to, it means he's automatically going to take over as president and run. So the issue of Mnangagwa coming in now is now almost a fight assembly. But basically, I think what is fundamental is when going forward, like what Dr. Rupia is saying, that we need to put on our thinking heads and avoid the euphoria and the same mistakes of 1980 and thinking that they are messiahs in politics. So basically, for me, one thing which is quite critical is the issue of transitional justice and national healing. There has to be a clear program on this, how it's going to be resolved and taken, and it has to be an inclusive process, because there are unresolved questions. Going far back, okay, if you're a war veteran, the war veteran, they talk about the liberation struggle, the atrocities. Then you have got also what happened in Matabeleland, in the Matabeleland and Midlands province, that's the southern part of Zimbabwe, the Gukura Hundi massacre. Then we've got the political violence, in particular after 2000.
Right. You know what, I'm going to pause for a second. I do want to come back to this, and we'll continue our conversation with you and Dr. Rupia just now. But we must go to Harare now, because Griselda is still on the streets there, and there's still celebrations taking place there. Griselda?
We don't have data.
Hello, Griselda, can you hear us?
We're live from the Harare International Convention Center. We're bringing you more reaction on the resignation of President Robert Mugabe, the long-standing leader of Zimbabwe. More reaction from ordinary citizens and also from those within the governing party, ZANU-PF. Let's chat now to one of the political commissars of the ZANU-PF Women's League, Angela Nyanyayi, who's also saying that she's welcoming the resignation of President Robert Mugabe. You'd also recall that the now ex-First Lady of Zimbabwe as well, Grace Mugabe, has been at the helm of the ZANU-PF Women's League, and subsequently, due to the utterances that we've seen her make with regard to senior leaders within ZANU-PF, she then was also expelled from ZANU-PF and also removed as the president of the ZANU-PF Women's League. Let's join now Angela Nyanyayi, who will chat to us. Mayor Angela Nyanyayi, thank you very much for your time this evening. An historic moment for Zimbabwe, for the Women's League. Grace Mugabe has been removed as the president. Let's talk a bit about that. And first of all, the reaction then to the sacking of Grace Mugabe as the president of the Women's League.
Grace Mugabe has been a menace to the public, especially to the Women's League of Zimbabwe. She was not friendly. She was cruel to Women's League. She was full of vulgar words. She was not. She didn't have love hard for people. She was always on stage scolding people, especially Emmerson Mnangagwa, our current president now. People are now happy because of the removal of President Robert Mugabe and Grace Mugabe. I think people are going now to be happy for the rest of their lives in Zimbabwe because they have been removed from their stumbling block.
Some would argue as well that you as senior leaders within the ZANU-PF Women's League did not stand up at the right time, because in many of the Zimbabweans that we spoke to, the argument is that the now ex-president of Zimbabwe had allowed his wife, Grace Mugabe, to take decisions on his behalf. Do you believe, as the Women's League, you stood up at the right time to arrest the situation within Zimbabwe?
Yes, I think that's correct, because especially when women are being elected for elections, there are some guys who stand up against women, especially in Magunje constituency where I reside. I was once in the elections for 2013 elections. Then there was this guy called Godfrey Gandawa who is involved in a scandal for he's the deputy minister for education and tertiary education. He wanted him out because he's
but ma'am, the question is, did you as the Women's League of ZANU-PF stand up when all of this had been taking place? You are senior political figures within the ZANU-PF Women's League. Did you stand up at all, or did you allow the situation to continue?
People were afraid of Grace because she was coming. But now that they see where the wind is going, they're now standing up in arms against it.
What are your hopes for Zimbabwe moving forward, man? We understand as well that Emmerson Mnangagwa will be sworn in as the president on Thursday. Those are just some of the reports that we are getting as well. Your hopes for Zimbabwe?
People are looking forward for prosperity, love and peace in Zimbabwe. And the industries are going to be opened. That's what we believe now.
Thank you very much, ma'am, there for your time. One of the senior political commissars within the ZANU-PF Women's League, who are saying that this is a new time for Zimbabwe. She doesn't believe that them as senior figures within the ZANU-PF Women's League did not stand up at the right time, saying that the ex-now president of the ZANU-PF Women's League, Grace Mugabe, did not allow anyone to speak up. Those are her words, and are saying now they believe that this is a time for them to take charge and a refreshing, perhaps, ZANU-PF Women's League to be formed as well again. But peace and prosperity is what is resonating throughout Harare at this time, as both political figures as well as ordinary people on the streets are saying that the future of Zimbabwe begins here today. Well, just news that we've also just got in from the South African presidency as well is that while there's no confirmation of the time that President Jacob Zuma will be arriving here, we understand that he will be arriving with the Angolan president. That was the early arrangement, as we understand, from the South African presidency. But all eyes now on that very important moment for the people of Zimbabwe, where they say that Emmerson Mnangagwa will take his rightful place as the president of this country. But certainly more beyond that, beyond the celebrations on the streets as well. One would really want to see how Zimbabwe itself moves forward and how it will resuscitate not just the politics of this country, but as well as the economy, of which these people are saying needs to take this country forward in order to create jobs and to resuscitate a health system that has long collapsed, as well as education within this country. Those are some of the critical aspects, after all the pomp and ceremony is done, that the people of Zimbabwe will hope are some of the pressing issues that are attended to. Criselda Lewis reporting live from the Harare International Convention Center.
Criselda, thank you very much indeed. That's Criselda. She was talking to a lady lady representing the ZANU-PF Women's League. And to be fair and honest, when we talk about Zimbabwe's history and liberation struggle, the women were not spectators. They fought hard, and they fought alongside their men and counterparts. And one comes to mind is Joyce Mujuru, and her struggle name was Taurairopa, which meant spilt blood. And legend has it that she shot down a plane during the struggle using a mortar. So they've played their role, and I would wonder what role she would be playing next. And I've still got as guests Dr. Martin Rupia in Pretoria and Tamuka Chirambowa, who's here in studio. So Women's League spoke, and I think a lot of people don't understand the fear that existed in Zimbabwe and persisted for such a long time, that at times paralyzed people to a point that they could take no action.
Yeah, I mean, there was excessive fear in Zimbabwe, and I think it was pervasive. And for you to understand this, you have to understand the creature that Robert Mugabe created. He even within the security forces themselves, even you see when this so-called coup was undertaken, they had to lock down the police. You heard from Chris Mutangwa's press statement yesterday where he was speaking about the support unit being turned into paramilitary, because Mugabe was in even the security forces to spy on each other. So he was playing them like a game of, like pawns on a board of chess. So basically it created a system of fear and patronage.
All right, Dr. Rupia, what does happen to characters like Joyce Mujuru going forward now? Because we haven't heard from her today, but it will be interesting to get her thoughts, because this was a long-time comrade that she was deputy president to for a long time as well, but fought alongside for so many years, returned to Zimbabwe alongside. There must be disappointment and joy at the same time.
Peter, what we now know is that some of the things are historical. Remember Chris Mutangwa indicating that Joyce Mujuru actually did not shoot, the helicopter. So maybe we want to move away from the myth-making that ZANU-PF has been, carrying out. We need in the first 100 days, to look at the bad policies that this government was, the previous government was following. And secondly, we must begin to look at the resources that are there. And thirdly, to look at the, delivery of services. Government can only deliver with credible institutions. And it is those three, for me, that we must hit the ground running, and not necessarily begin to isolate characters, and other people, but to be serious, to deliver and provide our people with concrete relief and also concrete opportunities to take them out of poverty. The level that Zimbabwe has degenerated in the region amongst the 15 SADC countries is really quite sad. And I think the brains exist and the enthusiasm, is available to take ourselves out of the situation that we have been, degraded into.
You talk about institutions, and a lot of work is going to have to be done. But I wonder if ZANU-PF can do that. And I'm thinking about the Auditor General's office. I'm thinking about the judiciary. I'm thinking about CIO and the Secret Intelligence Agency. So can ZANU-PF reform those that have served them so well?
It is not possible for ZANU-PF to undertake this task on their own. You need to create a stakeholder platform that brings in all the Zimbabweans, both at home and abroad, and also includes external actors, including SADC, South Africa, and other players, the African Union, to come and assist. I mean, you have an election commission that is completely lost the confidence of the ordinary Zimbabweans. You have a banking structure, treasury, in which the corruption and accessing of state assets was rampant. So you need to bring confidence to all of those. But that cannot happen if you don't have a platform that is really sitting and thinking through what new policies we must bring in, what bad policies exist that we must discard, and also align ourselves to SADC. Many of the policies adopted by Zimbabwe, almost without, with impunity, were against the SADC guidelines and principles. And it's about time that we begin to join the 300+ million people in SADC and become a normal nation that is prosperous, hardworking, and also providing hope and a destiny for our own people.
Mr. Chinamasa, what do the opposition parties do in a situation like this? We've had this momentous occasion, which they didn't contribute a tremendous amount to seeing, but there is a momentum and there's an opportunity maybe. What do they do?
I think, first of all, one thing which I might want to put across to you is that we are where we are because of the opposition. I think the opposition has played a significant role in trying to erode, Robert Mugabe's role. And I think one thing which we should be alive to, even the arguments which were being used by the military and even for the Mnangagwa faction, some of the arguments which they have been now fronting, and the policies. These are policies which were primarily being pushed for or advocated by the opposition when it came in 2000. So I think the opposition has played a fantastic role, but it's usually always so easy to praise the number 9 or Cristiano Ronaldo when he scores the ball, but those were in the background, they are never seen. Yeah. This has been a marathon. Yes, the changes come from the military, but let's go back where it started. But I think going forward, the opposition needs to go back to its constituents and rejuvenate, because when you look at Zimbabwe's economy, it has been reconfigured. It's no longer that Zimbabwe where it was a highly formalized economy. You have got close to almost 100,000 new farmers who are actually on the farm. Like if you go into the tobacco industry, we had about 90,000 small-scale tobacco farmers, contributing to close to 1 billion, which was 1 billion US dollars in terms of tobacco earnings. So that is actually a class that is emerging. And if you look at the environmental management report of 2012, it talks of close to 500,000 artisanal miners and the so-called Makorokoza. So what they call Zama in South Africa. So when you look at this, last year alone they contributed like 40% of the gold which went to Fidelity printers, and as of this, it has risen. And you also have the Zimbabwean diaspora contributing close to 1 billion US. That is as of last year. So these are significant forms of classes that have been forming, which were not there when the opposition started. And I think the opposition needs to go back, do its homework, and see how it can appeal to this. And as well as the millenniums, who are forming like now 66% of the population. So I think there are opportunities for the opposition. You can't write it off, because the opposition has run a good race, and this is a marathon.
So what happens to things like bond notes and the financial structures that have been in place?
I think the first thing which you have to know is that the bond notes had already run into a crisis. It was fictitious money. It was backed by money. The retail gross settlement system, whereby the RBZ would just punch in money. So the first thing before even we talk about the bond notes is addressing our Public Financial Management Act, whereby you give Parliament its powers to be able to monitor. And it also speaks to the issue of removing the Reserve Bank from doing quasi-fiscal or the activities and giving back power to Treasury. And then we have proper policies. And I would think what we need to look at now is it proper for us to return the Zim dollar or not? But if you talk with most Zimbabweans, they are not comfortable with the Zim dollar. So money is not only just about production, but there's also the issue of confidence. So for now, I wouldn't say the bond. I think removing the bond note will be the best thing to do. But then what we need to do is for those who had bond notes and money in their accounts, what do we do with that?
Dr. Rupiah, does Emmerson Mnangagwa bring in the opposition right away to somehow, I suppose, endear himself to the general population?
You see, Peter, one of the things I said in terms of thinking caps is that the tobacco industry is going nowhere. We need to, in the next 10, 15 years, the tobacco industry may not be viable. And so we need people that think long-term, that think strategic, but also create opportunities that are sustainable. As we speak, if the president in 2 days was to take over, the first things that he must do is to create, I think, a platform of think tank community who will advise him on how best to go. The previous government had no links whatsoever with the think tank community. All of them accused of being, agents of imperialism, regime change, agents, etc. But we have the first opportunity, I think, after 1980, to really make Zimbabwe work and to work properly as part of the global but modern economy.
How much time do you think it'll take to reconstitute Zimbabwe?
You will be surprised. In my view, within 36 months, we may begin to have the fundamentals in place, but they must be the correct fundamentals. Zimbabwe has a huge capacity of human resource. It has huge resources which have been abused, corrupted, and sold without benefit. So you start with the low-hanging fruit: agriculture, tourism, recovering the infrastructure, etc. It's a long story, but I think within 3 years, Zimbabwe is going to surprise a lot of people. There is huge potential for that country to come back to the glory days of what it was.
Do you agree, Mr. Chirambo? I'm Mr. Investor. I'm sitting in London right now. What decision process am I going through right now?
Yeah, I think what you have to look at, there is some kind of optimism, particularly if you go business, because even the person who is started to come in, Emmerson Mnangagwa, he of late is the one who has been conducting, running the show, while President Mugabe was in the background. And even when you look, even people like Finance Minister Patrick Chinamasa, I remember when he tried to suspend payment of bonuses last year, he was vetoed by President Mugabe while he was at a rally. And they'd also started the Lima debt realignment process, which was also like normalizing relations with the West and finances. So in terms of being pro-business, I think Mnangagwa has actually been trying to do that, and this is one of the trump card which he has been using. And I think his only question comes particularly on the democratic question. But I do share optimism that if the correct fundamentals are put in place, Zimbabwe can take off. But I think that can only happen if the people who are going to come into power now, they are not driven by zero-sum game politics or a winner takes it all. There is a need to realize that what we have gone through has been painful, has been a difficult period, and there's a need to build a one unified Zimbabwe and avoid this politics of the winner takes all. And I think once we do that, Zimbabwe can take off. And also one thing which you have to take note of, Zimbabwe has always been an agro-based industry. It has been an agro-based industry. So like Dr. Ripia noted, agriculture would be a very fundamental key point, and that would necessarily speak to the issue of land reform, to say, what do you do to people who are given land? The multiple farm owners, because there are some people who are given land who are producing, there are those who are not producing, but there's still the issue of solving the issue of exchange value and use value, particularly issues around property rights. Where are we going? Are we still going to remain with the 99-year leases which are unbankable and offer letters, or we are going purely capitalistic or neoliberal? So these are some of the things which need to be addressed to say, how do you make Zimbabwe's land work again? Because if Zimbabwe is to industrialize, it will be from agriculture.
Okay, Dr. Ripia, final thought from you before we say goodbye?
I think we need to provide and continue to journey with the people that are celebrating on the streets. And within a very short period, provide very practical examples of new thinking. The old thinking that has been in place has really destroyed hope, it has destroyed potential, and it has also removed potential external actors who could assist and work with us going forward. So I think this is now the time for us to start on a new slate, but really to think Zimbabwean and to provide a platform that all of us can begin to work together going forward.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Martin Rupia, academic but former Lieutenant Colonel in the Zimbabwe National Army, and to you, Mr. Tamuka Chiramboa, thank you very much indeed for joining us from the University of Johannesburg. Thanks so much for your time.